Hi there, I'm George Lonergan. I'm the Equality, Diversity Inclusion Officer here at Queen Mary. We're just going to do a role model profile, so if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Ynda Jas, and my pronouns are they, them, and I'm a member of QM Out at Queen Mary.
Oh, great. Thank you, Ynda. And thank you very much for volunteering to be a role model. It's great to have you. So can you just start by telling us a little bit about your role at the university?
Yeah, so I work in the Strategic Planning Office on the Research Excellence Framework, so I'm just helping the university to prepare for the Research Excellence Framework 2021. So we're going to be submitting sort of bits this year and then next year, which is it's an exercise that happens every 7 years, and it kind of informs research funding and grants and all that kind of stuff.
That sounds really interesting. So can you tell us a bit about what drew you to the university in the first instance?
So I actually came here to do a PhD, and I started that in 2016. And I was kind of drawn to the university mostly due to the supervisor that I was interested in, but also wanting to be in London. And Queen Mary is kind of based ideally for kind of enjoying what London has to offer. So yeah, it was kind of a mixture of supervisor for my PhD and location.
Great. Why did you want to become a role model, and why do you think visibility is important?
I don't know, I don't necessarily always think of myself as a role model, but I guess visibility is important because if you don't know that there are people around you who are different to sort of the norm, then you don't necessarily know what's safe to do, and it makes it much harder to kind of venture out of the kind of average, and if there aren't people around you who are already doing that. So I think it's important to be visible in order to allow other people to feel safe, and they can then experiment in other ways that you might not necessarily experiment if you've already kind of pushed the boundaries a little bit.
So is there anything else the university could be doing, do you think, to support the LGBTQ plus staff and student body?
I think potentially they could look at kind of systems and forms and things like that often don't kind of take into account like non-binary genders. So often you'll get male and female on forms, or you might have forms that have a compulsory title field but only have binary gendered titles, or titles that are associated with binary genders. Mm-hmm. So things like that kind of needs to be an awareness throughout the university that there is a greater diversity of genders than just two. And I think also training like frontline staff to be aware that if you look at someone you don't necessarily know their gender, so not addressing people either to their colleagues or to themselves as ladies or gentlemen, or sir or madam, that kind of thing. And I think also stuff like introducing gender neutral toilets in different buildings, rather than just having them as accessible toilets that are gender neutral by default, but also having kind of communal or just single cubicle gender neutral toilets. So I work in the Queen's building, and I'm not really aware of any gender neutral toilets apart from the accessible one. Mm-hmm. I think the only spaces with actual communal ones on campus are in the library and probably the Students' Union.
Yeah. So thank you very much for that. Those are some really great recommendations. Can you tell us about anything that you're working on at the moment, or anything outside of the university that you enjoy doing?
Yeah. So at the moment, I guess at the university I'm working on an event for LGBTQ plus History Month, on activism, with some colleagues in SLLF and HR. So that's going to have people from Lesbians and Gays Support the Miners, hopefully Lesbians and Gays Support the Migrants, and also London by Pandas, talking about a kind of diverse range of activism, and also kind of a focus on solidarity activism, so LGBTQ plus community activists supporting people from other kind of marginalised groups or other people who need kind of solidarity in some way. So that's something I'm working on at the moment. Outside of Queen Mary, I also kind of coordinate Non-Binary London. I set it up a few years ago. I've been kind of a little bit absent in the last year, but it's something that is kind of important to me, which it was basically not the first, but it was one of the first like general purpose non-binary groups for London. There was another non-binary London before it, but it kind of died out a little bit. So yeah, I set that up a few years ago, partly because I wanted to find people for my PhD, but also just because I didn't see anything that was like general purpose, like social and support for non-binary people in London. And I thought, if there wasn't anything in London, then where else would it be? Because it's the biggest population in the UK in terms of cities.
So you thought, why not set it up yourself?
Yeah, exactly. There must be loads of non-binary people in London. Like, where is the kind of single place where they can gather and connect with each other? And it didn't seem to be there, so I created that, and then it's kind of blossomed into its own thing. And now I don't really. It's mostly based on Facebook, but we do have offline meetups as well. I don't really use Facebook, but it just kind of lives by itself. I don't need to do anything to keep it going, because the community is great, and they do it themselves.
That's excellent. That's incredible work. So, do you have any advice for staff and students who are based in the university at Queen Mary, and if they're wanting to be more visible, what sort of things can they get involved in?
I mean, you could obviously come to the network and various events that are being organised. There are also loads of kind of groups and collectives and events organisers around East London. Obviously, Queen Mary is based in the heart of East London. It seems like East London is kind of a hub for the more kind of alternative and queer side of the LGBTQ plus community, whereas Soho might be more like the mainstream, mostly sort of cis gay men oriented space. East London and also places like Vauxhall are great for the queerer side, but then obviously you can, Queen Mary specifically, you can get involved in QML and the student network if you're a student. Come along to events, and then potentially you can get involved in organising stuff if you get to know the community and have ideas.
Oh, that's great. Well, thank you very much for coming to speak to us today, and thank you so much for volunteering to be a role model. I'm sure this is going to provide network, so thanks very much.
Thank you.
Cheers.